Hey everyone, welcome back to the other side of weight loss. So, back in November of 2019, I did a podcast that I was so nervous about because it was about alcohol consumption and how that can affect your health and your weight. I was nervous because I really thought that everybody was going to turn, the blind eye to the one podcast about alcohol because most people don't really want to hear about how bad it's for you, or you're going to say to yourself, I know it's bad for me. I don't want to hear about it. And you turn the blind eye. Anyways, I did the podcast and it very quickly rose to being my number one podcast out of all over 100 episodes within a few months. It is by far the most downloaded podcast now. So I decided I better do a follow-up. So when I was introduced to this woman, I knew I had to have her on this show. Her name is Georgia Foster. Georgia is a clinical hypnotherapist and voice dialogue trainer. She qualified with distinction at the London College of Clinical Hypnosis in 1996. Georgia specializes in alcohol reduction, emotional overeating, self-esteem, anxiety, and fertility issues. Her unique and highly successful approach has helped tens of thousands of people learn how to feel better emotionally and physically. Georgia has been featured regularly in the media in Britain, Australia, including Sky News, GMTV, Psychologies Magazine, and Good Housekeeping, amongst others. She's the author of 6 books: The Weight Less Mind, The Drink Less Mind, Drink Less in 7 Days, The 4 Secrets of Amazing Sex, The Stress Less The Stress Less Mind, and The Fertile Mind. Her online programs are 7 Days to Drink Less, Emotional Resilience Training, Believing in You, Self-Esteem, The Weight Less Mind, Emotional Overeating, and ESBD, Families, Anxiety Reduction and Self-Esteem for Kids and Parents. So welcome, Georgia.
Thank you for having me.
Poor Georgia's over in Australia, and it is 4:30 a.m. for her. So I thank you so much for getting up at these wee hours of the morning to do this interview, Georgia.
It's absolutely fine. It's my pleasure.
So, I could probably talk to you about every single one of these things because these are hot topics in my world and in this podcast world. So, but today I really do want to focus on the alcohol because doing that podcast last year really made me realize that, hey, maybe there's a lot more women than I obviously thought that are interested in cutting back or quitting drinking. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do.
Well, I believe it's the thinking before the drinking that's the problem. So when people say, they go to their doctor and they say, I really want to drink less, the doctor just says, well, why don't maybe you need to quit or try and just reduce a little bit. But the thing is, for a lot of people, that is easy to say, I want to drink less. But ultimately, the reason why it is difficult is because you've got to go to the part of the mind that emotionally drinks. Because most people are drinking, like mums, they put the kids to bed and they open up the bottle of wine. And before we know it, you're chopping the vegetables and all of a sudden you think, where have I been? That whole bottle of wine's gone. And that's habitual drinking as well. So a lot of people don't realize that a lot of this is done on autopilot.
Yeah.
And sadly, and it's interesting you talk about that podcast being so people were interested in it, it's because that a lot of people are worried about their drinking, but secretly they think maybe I belong in AA, should I abstain? A lot of the drinking I'm talking about is done in the home, so it goes under the radar. They don't need to go and drive anywhere. And so a lot of these people feel shamed, but I'm here to say that we need to stop the shame because there is a way out of it. And ironically, a lot of people who worry about their drinking, they tend to drink more because the more they worry about it, the faster they drink. And they think, what's wrong with me? Why am I doing this? I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. You've just got yourself into an emotional drinking habit.
Yeah.
So I'm here to let worry drinkers know that there is a way forward. You don't want, for some people, quitting is how they want to do it. But for most people, they can reduce.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the things that I hear the most from women that are coming into my office that are trying to lose weight and regain their health is I've had many, many women say, just don't take away my wine. I have only one or two glasses every single night or whatever, oh, I can't, on the weekends we drink and, a couple of bottles of wine, my husband and I, and it's become such a part of their daily routine that they can't imagine going without it, because to them it's the end of the day. It's the one thing that they're giving to themselves that's pleasurable.
And this is one of the biggest issues, is that in terms of weight loss, look, we know the story. We don't need to go there, why alcohol does encourage weight gain. But it's not just that. It's the next day, is you tend to crave the carbs and tend to crave the foods, and that's because your body's detoxing from the alcohol. And I always say to people, I'm not worried about how much you drink. I'm worried about why you drink.
Mhm.
Because the standard glass measurement, wherever you are in the world, is 14 for women a week and 21 for men. Now, realistically, that's not a lot for anybody.
That's
I
like a
think
glass per glass, or like
it's
14
that
glasses, or
that's 2 glasses a day.
yeah, 2 glasses a day. Okay.
But a lot of people say, well, the first glass is emotionally medicinal, and that goes down very quickly. And then I've only got one left. And I'm saying, look, let's stop the measurement, because the good news is that the reason why the governments around the world decided to create this kind of measurement, it's a bit like calorie counting. Actually, I was interviewed once by one of the biggest supermarket chains in the UK called Tesco's, and they said, Georgia, we have spent a fortune putting calorie counting, fat grams, sugar, salt grams on the side of cornflake packets and every food known to man. We've spent a fortune repackaging, and yet with the education, it's not making a difference. What are we doing wrong? And I said, well, as soon as you tell somebody, this is what you need to eat, this is what you need to drink, we all rebel.
Totally. Yes, we
Everyone
really
says,
do.
actually, stuff you, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I think that people have forgotten about the psychology of selves. And the thing is that we are adults, and we think, we want to make our own decisions. And I think that the interesting thing about when I was doing this particular talk, was that people, obviously I'd love to share my psychology training with you, which I'm
Yes.
sure would be very helpful. But really the point is that we know what to do.
Yeah.
We know how to do it. The point is, why are we not doing it?
Yes.
So I say to people, if you are drinking, 4 or 5 beers a night, or you're drinking that bottle of wine and that little sneaky one at the end, then open up the next bottle, or you've got maybe, a lot of people are sneaky drinking if they've got what I call alcohol police in the house, whether it's a husband or a daughter or a son. And a lot of people start to really worry about their drinking once their children start to comment,
Mm.
and then the sneaky drinking can kick in. But the sneaky drinking is not to do with the drinking problem. It's to do with the anxiety that somebody thinks that they're being watched or being criticized or judged, and they're really anxious. And a lot of people are also socially shy, so they use drink to be more relaxed or to feel more popular or more sexy. And the problem is, if you start to rely on the gin and tonic or the cocktail or whatever it is to become that person, then your mind thinks, oh, we have to do this if we want to feel this. And what
Right.
I'm saying is, my digital program is about training the mind to be that person before you drink, so you don't need to be that person when you drink.
Hmm. Let's go back to when you were saying that as soon as we hear what we're supposed to do, we rebel. What is going on in the brain? Is there something that it makes us always go towards what we're not supposed to?
Look, it's a very childhood thing that we do. I'm not saying we regress back to childhood, but I think that we all have that, well, I'm an adult, I can do what I want to do, as I said before. But actually, are you happy for me to start on the psychology? Because I think it'd be very helpful for people to
Yes.
understand a bit more.
Yeah.
Well, I'm training this amazing psychology, which is called voice dialogue, but I call it inner dialogue, because it's about the different parts we have that cause us to feel very out of control in our lives. And the first part is the inner critic. And the inner critic part is the part that says, why did you drink so much last night? You don't remember saying this, or you offended that person, or, you're going to this meeting today and you're hungover and they'll be able to tell, or, and then when you have the meeting, oh, well, if you hadn't had too much to drink last night, you would have handled that situation much, much better. And so a lot of people don't realize, and I say this genuinely, the inner critic, frustratingly, we can't get rid of it, but it's very powerful inside a lot of people's brains. And when you listen to the inner critic, it instantly creates anxiety. And what we know about anxiety, it produces cortisol and adrenaline, and the body says, get me out of here. So if somebody wakes up at 6:30 in the morning and is going to work or has to deal with children or whatever they're doing in their lives, whether they're retired, look, it doesn't make any difference. If you've got a strong inner critic, what will happen is it will use your history and say, well, you said you were going to reduce tonight and you said you're going to have an alcohol-free day or whatever it is, but the stirring, the scariness of that conversation, the brain says, get me out of here. And then the mind says, get me the wine. And it doesn't have to be at that time in the morning, of course, but through the day, there's this little stirring of that inner critic. And then that person on autopilot, because the brain has literally trained itself that alcohol is the answer, that wine or that beer will come out at 5 o'clock or wine o'clock time, which is 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, whatever it is. And that person feels like a failure. But what actually happens, the reason why they're doing it is because their inner critic, what's interesting, and I love this is what I really love about my work, is that when we drink, the inner critic goes away. So there's a chemical reaction that happens. There's a lot of chemicals that come into play, but the main one is dopamine. So when we drink alcohol, our body says, oh yeah, dopamine, thank you, love it, love it, love it, bring me some more, And so people feel like, women will say to me, Georgia, I drank a bottle and a half last night. Why am I doing this to myself? Say, well, you've got a negative thinking issue. So that's why I say it's and it doesn't have to be anxiety. It can be boredom. So many women will say to me, I've got such a busy day, Georgia. My job is so full on. But I get home and I live on my own and I'm just bored, Because when we're bored, the inner critic starts to stir and say, well, you should be doing this and you should be doing that and you could be at the gym and you could be doing this and da-da-da-da-da. I call it radio crazy, And so people end up drinking to just get rid of it, to squash it. And so what I say to people, really genuinely, it's not that you've got a drinking issue. You've got to shift that thinking because there is the opposite part, that intuitive part, that logical part. And the neuroscientists have said, what we do know about the inner critic, because I work with one amazing neuroscientist in the UK, is that, we've got the fear-based part of the brain, which is the amygdala, which is just behind the back of the ear. So if your amygdala is firing off, which is started by the inner critic, then you will need to extinguish it somehow. It could be food, I might add. I mean, my Weightless Mind program, if you're not a drinker, if it's about food, the same rule applies, is we need to extinguish these feelings. But ultimately, we know now that when you're in a calm space, you're in the prefrontal cortex. They've studied the brain, and when we're feeling safe, we're here. When we feel scared, we're here. So a lot of people are using the booze to get here. But I'm saying, actually, let's stop the inner critic. Let's train your mind and your body to be, have that intuition and that confidence that, well, my day was bad, but that person's doing what they're doing and I need to protect myself now, build my own natural, sober self-esteem, because when you're not listening to that inner critic, your self-esteem is strong.
Right.
And that's really what's about. I'm saying to people, we all want to be able to enjoy what we drink. I drink, I am a drinker. I love my wine. But I used to drink because to feel better about myself, to belong and to connect. And the problem is with booze is you just get fat if you drink too much of it, you know? I mean, I know a lot of people, I don't know if you've heard this terminology, which I really think is quite, interesting way of thinking about it. But, I've got a lot of clients. When I was in London, I had two very busy clinics, and I had like two types of, well, there's quite a different sorts of drinkers, but I call them the winorexics. They're really fit,
Mm,
they're slim, but they get the calories from wine. And so they, on the outside, they look very normal and fully functioning, and they hide their booze belly by excessive Pilates classes and
yeah,
things like that. But they've got the same issue, you
yeah.
know, and that's a concern as well, because then your liver is having a few problems, because you really do need to eat when you drink to help the alcohol. So, a lot of people are hiding and scared to admit that they are a big boozer because they don't look it.
Hmm.
They could be the driver, but they get in at nighttime and they'll open that bottle of wine and they'll be that secret drinker. And that is the inner critic saying, oh my God, if people knew how much you drank. I'm like, oh, wow, we need to stop all that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Everything you say can totally be applied to really any addiction. But really, when you're talking about this, I do think of all of the people that overeat and have a problem with eating. And I've done a show on overeating about dopamine in the brain and how it lights up dopamine. And it can absolutely be applied to that as well. So even if you're not a drinker, or maybe you're a drinker and an overeater, this can certainly apply to that as well. It's why we can't resist the food, because people say, I start my day saying, I'm not going to eat that, and I'm going to have a really good day. Today I'm on my diet. And by the end of the day, they've thrown in the towel, they've eaten the cake, and they're just like, why? And then the vicious circle starts again, right? It's not good. Go ahead. Were you
No,
going to say something?
and I was just going to say, and that's the problem, is that people, that's why dieting doesn't work. I mean,
No.
it has limited success, but what every single diet does, in particular, if it's really like really vigilant and strict, is that, I say there's a perfectionist personality trait in here. And the perfectionist says, oh my God, I had one extra almond, I've blown it. Because the inner critic and the perfectionist get into bed together and they say, you have really done it now, you've ruined it, you've been really good all week. And then all of a sudden, then that person goes to the binge mode. So they're kind of
Yeah.
all or nothing on the spectrum, here with their dieting or here with their overeating. And then their anxiety kicks in again. And that's one of the biggest problems with the perfectionist and drinking, because when a perfectionist dieter or drinker go to the eating side or the drinking side, is they feel a failure, you
Yeah.
know? Whereas really I'm saying, you can't be perfect. No one needs to be perfect. We have so many amazing resources within, but if you are so strict about what you should be consuming, there's always going to be anxiety and self-esteem issues. And we need to stop that, because if it's someone's birthday party, you want to have extra champagne, why not? Or if you're on an amazing holiday in Hawaii, why would you not want to have an extra cocktail? But it's the regular drinking that causes the problems,
Mhm.
and that's the kind of the thing I'm talking about. And I just think, we're such beautiful people, and we're all so different, and we're all so unique, and yet we try to compete or compare, or that person or this. But that's the inner critic, because the inner critic loves to compare. Well, they lost weight and look, they've kept it off. Why are you not doing it? And that little comment makes a big eruption in the brain, and the vulnerability kicks in, and the sneaky drinking kicks in. And so, I really want people to know that, if you're caught in this vicious drinking cycle, it's not because you belong in AA. It's because you've got a really strong inner critic.
Mhm.
That, and the other thing is about, people say to me, Georgia, I really try and have alcohol-free days, but I can't sleep if I don't have a few drinks, you know? And that's because the inner critic, and in the quiet of the night, it creeps in and says, ooh, what you did today wasn't very good, or tomorrow. And then, that busy brain syndrome kicks in. And then some people say to me, I just need to have that little sneaky Irish whiskey just to get me over the edge so I can sleep. Um, So, these are things that happen to real, everyday, fully functioning people on this planet. Women
Mhm.
say to me, if people really knew what I was doing, that they wouldn't like me. I said, but what you're doing isn't wrong. Your brain thinks this is normal behavior.
Mhm. But here's the catch here that I ran into personally when I quit drinking, and I see this a lot with other people, is you're right. People sneak and they're embarrassed by the amount that they drink behind closed doors, and they don't want people to know that. But on the flip side, people aren't very accepting of people that don't drink socially. And it's really hard if somebody wants to quit if all of their friends aren't, right? It's like, it's same with dieting. Once again, it's like when you're trying to eat healthy and you go to the party and you have to say, I'm on a diet, and everybody shames you for it. Like, oh, come on. Oh, what are you, gluten free? Like, same with the alcohol. It is way more socially acceptable to drink than it is not to
Mm.
drink. It makes people so uncomfortable when they're drinking and you're not. So I think that there's such, like, what do you have to say to that? Because I hear you, like, there's such a divided world there.
Well, a lot of people who've chosen to go sober, and congratulations for doing it, because it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
But the thing is that people who don't drink, when they're with drinkers, it makes drinkers feel vulnerable,
Yeah.
because their inner critic goes, oh, well, they can quit and be sociable, but you can't. And I'm
Mhm.
saying, we need to stop that, because some people, we said to people, if you like to drink, you like the taste of gin and tonic or wine or whatever, it's important that that's who you are. It's something you enjoy. But if you're drinking to run away from the inner critic, or drinking to run away from your life, that's when you need to look at your self-esteem and your anxiety levels, and discover how to do, to sort that part of your life out, so that when you do drink, you're in a better place. But the thing is that I think it's so important that a lot of people, big drinkers, will tend to only want to hang out with big drinkers, because they can hide their drinking
Absolutely.
vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So that's why sometimes there's such a big divide. We did dry January here, my partner Ian and I, because a lot of my audience are based in the UK, and it's a big thing in the UK to not drink for January. I might add, in Australia, it's not like that at all. It's our summer period. It's like everybody's out having
No.
barbecues and having fun and at the beach. But a lot of the mums would say to me, Georgia, you've chosen the worst month of the year to not drink. Your kids are on holiday, they're driving you mad, da 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 da. I said, you know what? It's completely fine. But you're right. People feel embarrassed, because when they've had a bit to drink, or before they start their drinking, their critics going, they're going to be watching you.
Yeah.
You might make a fool of yourself, and da 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 da.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing about it. The mums, we went out one night for dinner, and I was the driver. And everyone's like, oh, thank you. We don't have to pay for an Uber tonight. That's fantastic, Georgia. But, the fact is that it doesn't see, to me, having a drink or not having a drink is not an issue. But it took me a while to get there, because my inner critic said to me, well, like with the mums, I didn't have my kids till I was like 46. So I'm an older mum. And, the mum, my inner critic at school gate would say, you're an old mum. They want to make friends with you, all that kind of thing. And so, we have all these crazy stories in our heads. And the fact of the matter is that, natural sober self-esteem is the way forward. So socializing, if you want to drink, shouldn't be about that you're scared you're not going to be liked. And I
Mhm.
think that's the point. What you're saying is that we've got to stop the sober people who just want to get on. It's what they want to do. Just let them get on with it.
That's
Let
what
them
I
mind.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
It took me a while, and finally people quit bugging me, and it was like, get over it. I'm still a great time. And when you start turning the corner because you've drank in too much, I'm out. Who cares? It doesn't matter, right? What you do is
exactly.
your business. And finally people got comfortable with it. But my inner critic will still chirp in sometimes when I'm at a new social gathering, maybe with new people, and I'm the sober. I remember one woman recently, she's like, what, you don't drink? Like, and she was so astonished by it. And and just she couldn't even discuss it with me. And I was like, oh my goodness. Right. But you're right. It shines a light on their drinking problem for themselves, right? When there's somebody sober in the room. Same with dieting, right? It makes them look at themselves and makes them uncomfortable, which that's their stuff, not ours, right? So Georgia, you're kind of saying like, if possible, to find this happy medium. And I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule, especially when it comes to eating, which is what my niche is. It's like, you're talking about the perfectionist, you're either on the wagon or you're off the wagon. And there's this no in between. And this on the wagon people are so hard on themselves, and they're trying to be this perfectionist, and whether it's with food or drinking, and then when they do crash, they come tumbling off, and it's the binge of alcohol or food. And like me, you're like, let's try and find this happy 80-20 or happy medium where you're not using it in a negative way. But there's some people, I mean, with eating, and I know there is with drinking too, where there can't be the happy medium, where one drink leads to 20 drinks. Like they can't stop, right? Because they're so highly addicted to it. So what about those people? Is there that happy medium in there for them too?
Well, what happens with the perfectionist personality is the reason why they are either all or nothing is because when they're not drinking, they're always achieving, they find it very hard to relax. They are really when they do drink, because they drink really quickly. Before they drink, the inner critic is saying, you're going to screw it up tonight, you're going to drink too much, you're going to have memory loss, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas what I'm saying is that what really the goal of the perfectionist is to always be number one, always look successful. They have very high standards of themselves. And what actually happens when people drink is they become, I call it the disowned self, the part within that actually really wants to comes out when the inner critic is squashed because of the alcohol. And that's the relaxed, don't care, can become quite disheveled, out of control. So what I'm saying is that not that you necessarily need to be out of control when you're sober, is that if you become more relaxed with yourself in your sober life and don't set such crazy expectations of yourself, because it's been proven that trying to be perfect causes a lot of problems because you always never feel good enough or you're competing with people. Really, the goal is, as I said, to get here to the prefrontal cortex where you're intuitive, because nobody's perfect. I mean, I love not being perfect because it means that I don't give myself such a hard time all the time. And I think this is the problem for a perfectionist. It ends up being easier just to quit because the stress of drinking. And I say to people, if that's your journey, that's your journey. You know, you don't have to drink. Nobody said you have to drink. And if that's your job, if that's what you want to do, that's your choice. I think for the perfectionist, and I really genuinely mean this, is that it's okay to perfect not being perfect.
Right.
You know, we all have vulnerabilities. And in fact, I say to people, I have this belief, that person, I have a program called Believing in You. It's a self-esteem program. And in it, I talk about that natural charismatic you. If you look at people who are charismatic in life, they're not picture perfect slim. They're not divinely gorgeous looking. I mean, I've treated many people who are very famous in the world who are very attractive and got that perfect figure, and they have zero self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? A natural charismatic person is respectful of their flaws, is open to their vulnerabilities, and says, I'm okay when I'm not feeling okay. And these are the sorts of things that I like to talk about in the drinking program. 7 Days to Drink Less is about changing your relationship with yourself, because when you realize you don't have to be perfect, that pressure is off. And when that pressure is off, then you don't have to go to extremes. Look, I know it takes practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's great with perfectionists is that they are high achievers, and that's brilliant. We all want to have goals, But the problem is that life is very rarely perfect, and there's a mismatch. And when that mismatch happens, for example, an argument with my husband or an argument with a colleague, and then there's this urge to drink too much. Then that's why and once again, this is all because the brain works on what's familiar. And when you are using alcohol as your immediate way to get that fix, to be in another space, then you can get yourself into some tricky situations. But there's another part that's I say it's a female part. It's not necessarily for women only, but it's the pleaser personality. And the pleaser, you can have a perfectionist personality trait and a pleaser personality trait, but women predominantly are the nurturers. And so a lot of women will drink as a communication tool, because a lot of people are scared to say what they feel when they're sober. And so a lot of people, and I hear this from a lot of clients, they'll say to me, Georgia, my husband's a bit difficult and we don't have a great marriage. And then I drink too much because he makes me feel anxious and he's critical of my drinking. And then when I have to have these conversations with him, he says, you just drink too much. That's your problem. The marriage, nothing wrong with the marriage. And I say, well, what you need to do is you need to learn to be sober and have those communications with a cup of coffee in your hand. And then when you have that cup of coffee in your hand and you have that conversation with your husband, then at least he can't blame the drink. I mean, that happened to me once, and the husband ended up sending me an email because he thought she was having an affair because she was getting so assertive with him. But I was like,
well, I
no,
know my personal relationship, my husband, when he would drink early on in our relationship is when he would be most emotional with me, where he would be more vulnerable and he'd open up more and tell me how much he loved me and how beautiful I was, and et cetera, et cetera. And at first I was like almost wanting him to get drunk so I could hear it. And then as the relationship progressed and I quit drinking, it got to that point where I had to tell him, don't tell me these feelings unless you can tell them to me when you're sober as well. And then
absolutely.
that ended that.
So he doesn't
Right.
drink now too?
No, he does, but he knows now not to go down that road of getting overly emotional and start talking to me about stuff like that. And he knows he doesn't drink nearly like how he used to. So he doesn't get to that point anymore where he's this, very emotional guy, but still, he just knows not to say it to me now.
And that's really an interesting point. That is the disowned self. When the inner critic goes away, who we really are comes out. And I'm not saying it. Some people, when a pleaser drinks, they can be a poor communicator because they yell at the wrong person and they tell somebody something that they've been harboring for a long time. But that's a very important point. A lot of people feel that they can't have sex unless they've had a bit to drink.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Because the inner critic goes away, and a lot of people say, I can't have any form of intimacy unless I've had a quick Dutch courage kind of vodka or a wine. And that to me is really sad, because being intimate, I have a rule with myself. I only have sex sober.
Me too.
Because
Yeah.
I want to be 100% there.
Yeah.
But that is in itself that's once again, it's a self-esteem issue. Mm-hmm. And being a sensual sexual person, being sober is so wonderful. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of people, and it's fine if you feel a little bit with a new partner, maybe you feel a bit scared, or, you might have that couple of wines because you've just had a lovely dinner and feeling whatever. But after a period of time, if you're using alcohol to be intimate, then you're going to have a few issues with your body image, about being able to relax and all those sorts of things that make sex so much more fun when you're sober.
Yeah. I think because I spent the first half of my sexual life only having sex drunk, that once I sobered, I was like, never again. So I have a big divide now. Yeah, because I got myself into trouble and things I wouldn't have done sober, I was doing because I was drinking and felt like, I had to do it because my decision-making part of my brain was not there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's still, so what you're saying is it most important then, Georgia, to focus on that self-esteem and working on the emotional stuff and kind of put the stop drinking aside because it'll come naturally, do you think? Or like, do you have to work on the emotional stuff first?
Well, I'm about reduction. I'm not about quitting.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people do use the program to quit, but the people I'm talking about still want to drink.
Mm-hmm.
And when you work on the emotional part of the mind, so there's two things really I think is important, because when you are a drinker, or it's same thing applies to food, is if you're using it for emotional reasons, it becomes a habit. So even though there is the emotional part, there is the habitual part. It's
Yeah.
the autopilot thing. A lot of people will say to me, Georgia, I didn't realize that I ate half a packet of cookies. Where was I? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the brain says, oh, anxiety, quick. How do we extinguish it? Food, booze. And so what I'm saying is we change that autopilot. And obviously that's through the power of hypnosis. And so I work with the psychology I'm trained in with hypnosis, so that, you see, I'm not anti people going into therapy at all. But by the time people find my program, they are sick and tired of this repeated behavior that they just can't seem to stop. What's wrong with me, Jordan? I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. You've just got yourself into an emotional habit. I'm saying is, you know, what really the reality is that the inner critic uses our history to tell us how to behave.
Yeah.
But when we don't listen to the inner critic, we all have an inner critic and we have to learn to manage it, which is part of the program. But when you recognize there's another way to bring in that authentic self, that intuitive self, then when you train your mind through hypnosis to have an inner dialogue that's positive and assertive, and you feel calm and you feel more confident in your sober life, then there isn't this mad rush to eat and drink in unhelpful ways. And the lovely domino effect is that when you continue to do this, because your mind works on what is familiar, it gets used to this response. So I'm saying is your history doesn't reflect who you really are. So who you are is not who you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you build your confidence up and you manage your anxiety and your negative thinking through that wisdom, and that, you know what, that person's just not a very nice person, it's nothing to do with me. Because a lot of pleaser personalities always think what's wrong with me rather than what's wrong with them, because pleasers tend to attract bullies, pleasers tend to attract narcissistic personality disorder. um, when you build your sober communication, life's just easier. And then the goal of the program is that habitually you start to think, pause, induce those lovely calm sensations, be here first, so that you're not using the food and the booze to extinguish those feelings. And that makes a massive difference. So, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, if you lose your job tomorrow, that you might drink more than you plan to because you're anxious. But the regular drinking is what causes the grief. And it's the regular drinking that becomes the habit. So what we know, the neuroscientists have, you know, well, what we used to believe is you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But we now know that that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And through the medium of hypnosis, which I might add is the same brainwave activity as meditation, is that you can train your mind in a very short space of time to be calm around food, booze, to intuitively eat, to be honorable to your sense of self-worth. And I say to people, self-esteem is something we have to learn. We're not born with it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
life can erode it. And we could have one, some really positive experiences. And then all of a sudden we meet a bully at work who says you're not good enough or makes you feel less than. And I always say to people, if someone's being mean to you, whether you're 5 years of age or whether you're 55 years of age, it's never about you. It's always about them. And so we need to say, well, whatever that was going on for that person is their gig. But it's about starting to take ownership of the fact that living a more intuitive life, a more humble, grounded life, you know?
Yeah.
because you can hang out with yourself when you're sober so much more and like yourself, and when you do that, you don't have to scull back the wine and have those cocktails quickly because you don't feel good enough sober.
Right. Yeah. And I think it'll be a nice thing for my listeners to hear that are interested in slowing down, that your take on it is not quit forever. And I think that that can be very probably reassuring to some people that, hey, you know what? I don't have to quit forever, but the thought of cutting back makes me feel so much better. And I think that that's my approach to food too, is I don't think you should go without Haagen-Dazs for the rest of your life. Like, that's just soul crushing,
Mm,
right? Like, who wants to do
mm,
that?
yeah.
Right. So the happy medium, not to say that if somebody wants to quit completely, if that's their road that they feel they need to take, that's awesome as well. But your take is, let's just see if we can just start with reducing the amount that you drink, and that is possible. Because I think a lot of people don't think that's possible. Going back to what I was saying before, like some people, it's a runaway train, they drink excessively, they're highly addicted to it. And so to say now you're going to cut back on how much you drink can be quite, that seem impossible, I guess would be the word.
And I think that part of the reason why it feels impossible is because the media make it feel like it's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one day in the newspaper, you've got red wine causes tongue cancer, and then the next minute you've got red wine's really good for your heart. We have such mixed messages. Um, and what I think is, I was going back to talking about the measurement of what is too much. Well, too much is when it's too much. And my goal of the program is to get the reduction down, the self-esteem up, and that lovely switch between those two means
It's
that the
amazing.
self-esteem is just so much better, and you wake in the morning and remember conversations, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the people, especially perfectionist drinkers, the bell doesn't ring because they drink too quickly. They're anxious drinkers. The inner critic is saying, you're going to really drink too much, and they do. And there's too much dopamine kicks in, and then they have memory loss and things like that. But when you start to honor who you are as a person that can drink and enjoy, then everything is better. And moderation is possible for most people. And I really genuinely need to say this. I think there are people who do belong in AA, but there are a lot of people who don't.
Yeah.
And I know homemakers, entrepreneurs, people in the corporate world. There are people out there who are really worried about their drinking. But once you get this in check, then you can drink, you can enjoy it and have a beautiful meal in a restaurant and not feel guilty about it, because the guilt is part of the problem, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And because we, you know, because we live in a society where alcohol is taboo and we're made to feel bad about it, that makes people go underground with their drinking too. So, I'm saying I'm here to talk about it. I'm here to say, look, there's nothing wrong with you. You've just got yourself into a bit of a bad drinking habit.
Mm-hmm. So, and your methods contain hypnosis. So I think a lot of people, when they think of hypnosis, they think of, lying on the couch and somebody putting them into this state of where they're unaware of what they're doing. But I know that that's not, you're saying like hypnosis, you can do this by yourself in your living room and start changing your brain. So can you explain what hypnosis is and how it works?
Sure. Well, the good news is we can all be hypnotized. And in fact, that window before we go to sleep at night, that 20-minute window, is when we are in that alpha theta state. And that alpha theta state is a natural brainwave activity. And meditation is in that state as well. But unlike meditation, and I'm very pro meditation, but a lot of people, in particular perfectionists, have a problem achieving that Zen state, or that, breathing, or that thinking that particular word or that mantra. But with hypnosis is, with the 7 Days to Drink Less program, there are specific recordings that people, say to women, please listen to, if you can, once a day, just 25 minutes. Now, it's been proven that 25 minutes a day in that window of time, but when you're kind of half awake, half asleep, is when you're in that open to suggestion state. where your mind emotionally can discover new ways of feeling. And the feelings is what I'm talking about here. I'm not with people who take you down a garden path or into this wonderful beach or up a mountain. You know, I'm about getting to the core and working with that person's mind emotionally so that they feel better. Now, what's lovely about what the neuroscientists are saying is when you go into hypnosis, that lovely window, you are open to brain conditioning much faster than you are in your conscious world. And that really, if you want to make a change, this is the way to do it. Because what's interesting, if you have a conscious desire, here you say, right, I really want to drink less, or I want to eat less. But your unconscious mind, which is where all your emotional habits, some people call it the subconscious mind, where your emotional habits are, says, well, we need to binge eat when we feel unsafe or vulnerable, or we need to drink when we're feeling socially shy. This part of the brain will always win the argument. And that's why people say, I don't have any willpower, Georgia. I'm like, there is no such thing as willpower.
No.
It doesn't exist. If your emotional part of the brain doesn't know that you want to feel safe before you eat, safe before you drink, to improve your self-esteem, it will continue on to do that. So that's what I love about hypnosis. We're all in a hurry, but equally, the program is about training your mind to be more intuitive, because when we're intuitive, we think, we're more paused, we're more grounded, and all of these feelings lead you to a logical space. And, you know, as I said, when you go into therapy, it's about the when did it happen? Why did it happen? Well, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in, because the neuroscientists now know that the when and the why, people may want to know about that. Therapy is great. Talking therapy is important. But sometimes the inner critic kicks in and says, well, there you go. You know, that happened because you did this, or this is your lot in life and you can't change. But what we now know is the brain is malleable, pliable, and neuroplasticity is absolutely how we're moving forward now, is that where you were before in your thinking is not set in stone. And hypnosis is just a really fast way. It's not a lazy way. It's just a very effective, fast way to create emotional changes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I love it. It's so brilliant, because people after, you know, my clinic will come and, you know, when I was working in London, I do see clients now over Skype, etc. You know, I say to them, who you think you are is not who you really are. And that part that said yes to listening to this podcast, for example, that intuitive, healthy, confident part, we know it's there because you're listening.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's there because you're watching. So why is it not present more? And the only reason why it's not present more is because through life experiences, the inner critic has extinguished it and says, I'm the boss. I'm at the helm here. I know more. I'm going to keep you safe, because the inner critic says, if I keep you vulnerable, then you're always hypervigilant. But the problem is it makes people anxious. So I'm saying is we've got to stop the anxiety and the negative thinking. And really, hypnosis is such a great way. I mean, the Dalai Lama says is, if everybody meditated for 25 minutes a day, the world will be a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely agree. We never stop, and we never allow ourselves that time to emotionally replenish enough.
Yeah.
And often we use alcohol to be that emotional replenishing. And I'm saying, if you do it in other ways, and it could be going for a walk with the dog.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they say being in nature is another way to do it. But, you know, and a combination of all of this would be amazing. But, you know, we need to find other ways to replenish emotionally. And when we do, our self-esteem improves, and we don't need to drink so much, you know?
Yeah. I always tell people, if you're trying to, you know, change your eating habits, quit drinking, it's not enough to just take it away and use willpower. It just does not work. And the sooner people realize that, the faster they're going to get results. But yet we keep looking for the quick fix, and the quick fix is usually just, well, I'm just going to go on this quick fix diet, or this quick fix, you know, diet, alcohol program, whatever it is. And it's like, no, it always fails, always fails.
I
It's,
know, yeah,
yeah.
it's crazy. And the inner critic kicks in. As I say to people, if you have a history of dieting, the inner critic is saying, oh, they're rolling their eyes, here she goes again. And
Yeah.
even that one comment is enough to make people think, oh my God, everyone thinks I'm a failure. Oh my God, it's not going to work. And so this whole vicious cycle keeps coming back. I'm saying we need to stop that treadmill of thinking,
Hmm.
because that's just holding us a prisoner in our own mind and our own
Hmm.
bodies, you know?
I like the going to the brain training stuff is so fascinating to me. I always talk about, what wires or what fires together wires together in your brain. And that's seems to be what you're talking about. Like these thoughts are so associated with drinking, the guilt, the perfectionism, it like instantly brings up the alcohol. So it's about burning new neural pathways so that when you're feeling anxious and fearful and all these emotions, the overwhelm, that instead of going down the alcohol pathway, that you now have a different tool where that you can use to bring that down and get more connected with yourself, whether that's through the hypnosis or walking in nature, all of these different tools that can be utilized to start making these new neural pathways in the brain so that you're not associating it with drinking anymore.
And I think I think that's great news, because
Yeah.
when we understand, which is great, we love. I mean, I'm so interested in the brain. I find it so fascinating.
Hmm.
But the neural pathway, is the thing is the pathway that goes to the amygdala is just learnt behavior. you know the learnt behavior to go to the prefrontal cortex. In the old days, the sages and the meditators and the gurus would say, the third eye, but we now know that that's true. They were right. And we need to educate those pathways to be present, to be more available. And it doesn't take much. It really doesn't take much. But the thing is that people often say, Georgia, I just can't seem to stop this thinking or this eating or this drinking, and it just really is. The brain's impersonal. It doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It just knows what you think, and if you think something, you know, um, for example, some people say to me, I really don't like, this is a really good example. Clients will say to me, Georgia, I've decided that I'm going to start drinking white wine because I hate it. I'm like, why would you want to do that? Because I know I will sit on one glass all night. Why would you want to put yourself through pain? Or, for example, when you want to have an alcohol-free day, and I always say to people, don't do your tax return on an alcohol-free day. Do something fun so that
Hmm.
your mind relates, because I believe alcohol-free days are very important. You know, is that, and part of the program is to teach people to have alcohol-free days, because many people don't have them. Is that, alcohol-free days should be a time where you, without sounding cliche, is do that yoga class, go to that movie with your friend, do something that shows your mind that having a day off the alcohol is fun. Get
Hmm.
that book out or that magazine, or do something for you. Because I think that, we want, the thing about not having alcohol in your bloodstream shows you not only can you actually not drink, that you can have alcohol-free days, which is incredibly liberating, is that who you are when you don't drink is a great person,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
really important.
So important. So walk us through a little bit of the 7 days, like drink less in 7 days. What does it consist of?
Well, over the 7 days, you don't have to. You could listen to all of the audios in a day if you want to. The first section is really about the mind, the neuroscientists that we know. And we know that when you're in that negative space, sorry, excuse me, when you're in that negative space, you will tend to drink too much. So it's about getting the mind right on day one, doing the hypnosis on day one, and then talking about the different personality traits, the inner critic, which is the umbrella to all of this unhelpful thinking about drinking. And then if you have that perfectionist personality trait, connecting with that, the pleaser. One whole section is starting to shield yourself, because a lot of drinkers, and rightly as you said, Karen, that when you decide not to drink, or to drink less, the world are there, what's going
Yeah.
on here? You know, I teach people the social skills to shield themselves so they can get on with their goal. And I say to people, don't tell people that you want to reduce your drinking. Just do it for yourself, because all they'll see is that you're drinking less. I mean, you can tell people, I mean, please tell people if you want to, but this business is very private. And I say to people, you know, I want you to see the success. So that's on one of the sections. And then there's also another section talking about alcohol-free days. And then when we wind up to the end of the 7th day is talking about the future. And the future, because what the inner critic tries to do is be prophetic, or that crystal ball moment, and say, oh, well, you've got this birthday party coming up in a week's time. I bet you're going to screw it up, you know?
Yeah. You've done this before. You're going to fail again.
Yeah. So really the future talk is about training your mind to, it's a very very common technique with sports performers. I work with a lot of actors and singers with this technique. And what it is, I take you into your future. And the mind, when you think negatively about the future, the inner critic's always there. But when you create in hypnosis future experiences, in the reality of that time, your mind already thinks you've been there. Now, this is evidential. It's been proven by, once again, the neuroscientists, is that your imagination, when you use it in a particular way, it can create positive future moments, so that when you get there, your mind says, oh, I've been here. If you had a fear of flying, I would take you on a flight over and over again. So that when you get on the plane, your mind says, oh, I've been here before, even though it was in hypnosis. And this is one of the most amazing tools. So I love to finish off with that on the 7-day program. But through the hypnosis, through the entire program, once people finish it, you know, I say to people, it's like going to the gym in your mind. It's exercising your mind. So if you're having an unusually challenging time, put one of the recordings on. Or before your 1 o'clock time, when the kids have gone to bed, or when you get in from the office and you're feeling like, oh, I've got to have that drink moment. Those are the moments where you put the recordings on, and they reset the scene in your head. And ultimately is, through the 7 days, you are literally training your brain to be more intuitive, so that you don't need to drink to feel safer.
Right.
So that's what I love about it. It's a
I love it.
independent therapy. It's a very independent program that, you know, you don't have to go into group meetings. You don't have to go into, you know, hey, I'm a drinker and I'm worried.
Yeah.
You can just go on your own journey and keep it to yourself.
Yeah. And nor do you need a hypnotherapist with you to bring you through it, which I think is very important too. Like, you can just do this on your own in the comforts of your own home and work through this process to get the success. So I think it's great. Yeah. So where can people find you? I'm going to put everything in the show notes, but just in case people are driving and listening and they want to find you right away, where can you be found?
Yeah, my website is georgiafoster.com. Georgia is the state of America, Foster is in the beer.com. And you'll find the 7 Days to Drink Less digital program. It's easily downloadable. All the content is there. There's a membership site that you get login details in. We also send a message to your phone, to your cell phone as well, because I know some people's spam folders get a bit trapped with the information. And, you know, start straight away. I mean, any questions, please let me know. But georgiafoster.com is the website. And this is my baby. This is my big passion. Obviously, those who are interested more in the Weightless Mind, which is the emotional overeating program, that is there too. But underpinning both of these subjects, food and booze, is the same principle.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Which I think is great. And then people can just go pick up does the book bring you through the process as well?
Yes, you can purchase the book Drink Less in 7 Days on Amazon if you want as well, or through my website. You know, either or is completely fine.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Georgia.
Thank you so much for having me.